head up high into the Green Mountain National Forest to the headwaters of the West River. There, in 2010, the U.S. Forest Service decided to replace a culvert in Jenny Coolidge Brook with one large enough for the wetter and stormier future we know is arriving, rather than one that was merely large enough to get by. The result, after Irene devastated the valley and destroyed other culverts nearby, was that the crossing of Jenny Coolidge remains intact.
This culvert replaced two existing approximately 6 to 8 foot diameter round pipes, and what it was a split channel that came in and was one flow on both of them. And so when we redesigned it, our goal was to replace both of those, both structurally deficient, and then they also were a barrier to fish and other aquatic organisms. So when we design these, replace these, we design them to accommodate a bank full width, so that would accommodate the stream and then a portion of the bank. So it wouldn't go all the way to the top of the bank, but kind of a, what you can imagine as where the vegetation and your ordinary or your most frequent storm event would go to. It's not a large increase in price. We've ranged from probably 20 to 40% increase by going with these, but you increase your service life and you decrease your maintenance. A round pipe, you have to come and clean them out frequently or more routinely. Debris and things like that get hung up on them. And with this size of a structure, debris will pass through, so you won't have to worry about cleaning it. It doesn't get a lot of wear and rust because it's out wider than where the water flows, so your service life will be longer. So if you spread that cost out, you're getting, it's a comparable price to what you would get with a round structure. In terms of high water and flood capacity, these are designed to exceed the 100-year flood event. So in an event like Irene, which actually exceeded the 100-year, this has enough capacity to pass that as well. Right here, this is approximate elevation of Tropical Storm Irene when it passed through this structure. The event exceeded the 100-year, but we still had enough elevation so that it left us some capacity in there beyond the 100-year event. So you'll see these frequently around the National Forest. It might not be this type of structure, it may be other things. It may be a bridge or it may be a box, depending on the size of the structure. We go through an analysis or conceptual phase where we look at several different types and pick the most economical and feasible for the location. During Tropical Storm Irene, we did not lose any structures that were designed in accordance with the stream simulation method. We lost several structures that were older structures that were just your standard round pipe, and lost several of those, and quite a bit of road damage as a result of those, but we didn't lose any that were designed with this method. When we go through and try to analyze in the conceptual phase, and we're looking at different types of structures, we have to consider other things that the structural impact and the road and other features are all impacted by this size. So if this failed, a large portion of the road could fail as well. It could be other compounding things downstream as well that it could fail, whether it be other structures from that surge from when this one fails, or other roads downstream, town infrastructure and those types of things. Yeah, there are other impacts that if it fails, that could cost even more money other than just the structure. We survey several feet, hundreds of feet upstream and downstream, and we determine a reference reach that is similar to what would be the most natural profile of the stream and have the most natural features that the stream would if this culvert or structure wasn't in here. Then we take that data and then we recreate that through the structure. So that's how you'll see your steps and your weirs, your different boulders, sizes and things like that, your embankment, the width. It's all dependent on all that survey and information that we gather. This one had several steps up through it, and as a natural stream in a large event, those will mobilize and move, and that's the way this design. So while those did move, other boulders and features filled in behind it, so it just kind of recreates itself like a natural stream would. A natural stream will pass debris as well as sediment, but so large trees, and there's some trees here near us right now that started out upstream and moved through during Irene and didn't plug it and didn't do any damage to it. We developed banks in there as well, so we keep the stream so it's not going to meander and get scour and things like that on the abutments. The invert of the pipe, we try to get a natural bottom so that it will accommodate what a aquatic organism would encounter in a natural stream, so they could traverse through the structure. If you don't have that natural, if you're too narrow or you're too wide, you could change the depth of the water and the depth of the pools and things like that, and then that could impact how organisms move through it. But it also impacts your how you survive a large storm event as well.
One of the things that we saw post-Irene is some culverts held up better than others, and over the years when culverts go out, we've been either replacing them in kind with the same size, or we've been replacing them and bumping up the size based on geometries and flow curves and what we expect flow to be. What we're really finding, and what Irene showed us very clearly, is that by increasing culvert size, we are saving ourselves a lot of time and a lot of money. We're realizing now, even after that, that we may have even been underestimating those culverts that we were making larger based on increases in precipitation and snowmelt that we're seeing as a result of climate patterns and climate change. So the predominant philosophy now seems to be put in the biggest culvert that you can afford, because as we see things change more and more, though, that's just going to be money in the bank for culverts we don't have to replace.
I think it was the size as much as how the river approached the culvert and the extent of the water flow that came at the culvert when it started to actually impact the culvert on either side. There were a lot of culverts that were washed out and not damaged. And there's a difference between obviously a damaged culvert and a washed out culvert. So upsizing it, I think, is best on both accounts. But now that the river corridor has changed substantially, where's that river going to hit when the next flood comes? And creating barriers, sizable riprap, concrete barriers to wing walls for a box culvert that then will bear the brunt of that force, so that the culvert stays in place and that the water is able to then flow through. Overall infrastructure improvement, in terms of upsizing, it's an additional cost up front of 20 to 40%, but taking into consideration the fact that once the culvert washes out, then the infrastructure, the road washes out, and then the repairing of the road would be exponentially higher overall than that 20 to 40% increase that you put towards the increase in the upsize in the culvert initially.
If we spend 150% now, that culvert might last for another 20 years or 30 years if it's properly sized. If it's not, we could be in there the next year or in 5 years replacing it at another 150%. So there's a real financial benefit to municipalities and homeowners for driveway access, etc., to put in culverts that are properly sized, or bridges even, which can have a bigger span and allow more flow.
Well, of course, climate change brings to mind the urgency of changing our habits and the amount of CO2 and other pollutants that we put into the air that changes our climate and the rainfall. But it also is a call for many of us to really heighten our efforts in the whole area of adaptation. We have to make our communities, our roads, our bridges more resilient to these increased flood events. They're going to happen more frequently. The intensity of these storms, a term we call microburst storms that bring anywhere from 6 to 10 inches of rain over the course of several hours. Our roads and our communities are going to be maintained at a great cost if we don't invest in infrastructure that can coexist with these types of increased peak runoff events.
After Irene, Vermonters came together to help their neighbors, their state, and their land with a will that was inspiring to see. And even as they were digging out their houses and rebuilding the countless roads that have been literally wiped from the map, they began studying those spots that suffered less destruction for what they had to teach them. determined, as they had been after the flood of 1927, not just to build back what they had, but also to use what they have learned to build it back better. And we will.